Hello, this is John Majori from MajoriOnBowie.com. And today I have a very, very special guest, all the way from Japan, Marc Lowe, who is making his return visit to MajoriOnBowie.com, but the first in-person visit. Marc
True.
is the second person that I ever interviewed for this blog. And really, the experience of interacting with him was one of the experiences that kickstarted the entire interview series on the blog. So I'm enormously grateful to Marc. Marc is a composer, a singer and songwriter. He is proficient in multiple instruments, many, many instruments. And he is a prolific producer of all kinds of content, live musical performances. He posts music. He posts video lectures and commentary on his YouTube page. He is also an educator who, among other things, teaches a course on Bowie, and I'm going to ask him a little bit about that, in Japan. Marc is an American living in Japan, and that to me is remote because I'm living in Albany, but to him, Albany's remote. So it depends on where you're watching this.
I'm from New Jersey, so it's not that remote.
So Marc, so thank you, and thank you for joining me, and welcome.
Thank you, John. Yeah, pleasure.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to keep talking, but the first time I encountered Marc was when I discovered a video that he posted, which was a cover of David Bowie's "I Can't Give Everything Away," which I selected for the cover of the week feature, which is a feature I do on the blog every Monday. And I reached out to him many weeks after that and asked him if he wanted to do an interview, and he graciously agreed. And we did a written interview that actually it was so extensive that I ended up doing it in 3 parts. And as much material as we covered there, Marc, I wanted to sort of dig a little bit deeper into the experience of teaching a class about Bowie in Japan. And so let me sort of ask you broadly to describe the theory of the class. What do you teach? How is the class structured?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking that, John. Actually, it presented itself as a wonderful opportunity because, I mainly teach literature. I teach American literature and a bit of Japanese literature. And let me just say something about my background, and then I'll go into the Bowie class and how and why and all that kind of stuff. So how much background to get? I mean, I was teaching at another university, University of Kyushu University, which is really the best university in Kyushu, which is the southern part of Japan, the southern island of Japan. I was there for 8 years. And at that time, I was not teaching Bowie. And I taught some literature, and then I ended up shifting because I changed departments at one point due to contractual things. I was teaching a lot of, academic writing skills and these kinds of classes, but I also did bits of creative writing and literature and stuff like this. I came to Tokyo after my contract ran out, basically, in 2019, all kinds of things in between that. And a few years back, at one of the universities where I've been teaching, I teach at multiple universities now rather than just one, kind of piecing together semi-freelance style. Also gives me a chance to do music and other things, which is nice, more than if I were having to do committees and stuff like that. So, but I was asked to teach a class on British culture. And I'm, as you mentioned, from the US. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and I have relatives, or sort of not blood relatives, but relatives or relations were living in Albany at one point. So I've been to Albany.
Okay.
Although obviously time and space, are separated by, and how many hours, right? Because it's my morning here and it's your evening. But so I was asked at one of the universities where I was teaching literature primarily, which I still do, to do a British culture course. Actually, it was American or British culture And they said you can do either. And they assumed that I would do a literature course. Well, I'm the kind of person who likes to take on new challenges and likes to, it's more exciting to do something I haven't done before than to repeat something I have done before. So at first I was thinking, okay, well, literature, well, I'm doing American literature already, and I have the freedom to do that already. So maybe I'll do J.G. Ballard. It's a, UK author I like, kind of science fiction literature and weird stuff. And so that was my original idea. And then when I spoke to the person who had taught the course before, he's like, well, when I did the course, I did African American, used to say black, but now we say African American culture and jazz in the US. And I was like, oh, jazz. So then ping pong, I think music, I think jazz, I think Black Star, I think Bowie, I think UK Bowie. And I'm thinking, oh man. And I said to him, well, I've been a fan of the artist David Bowie for many years, and I've read many books and blah, 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 blah. How about designing a course on David Bowie? Would that be something that I could do? Or, should it be literature? Because he had teaching jazz. So he said, he got really excited. He's like, that sounds great. I think the students will love it. Why not do it? So that was how it started. And that was how it, was able to teach that rather than just another literature class, which is fine too. I love literature, but so actually I taught the course for 3 years consecutively, not full year round, but one semester each academic year. So and it was like 13 weeks. And then actually last year I was able to teach it at a second university where I was teaching. This is an aside, because they also out of nowhere asked me to teach a British culture course. So I said, well, how about David Bowie? I'm teaching that already in another school. And the same reaction, interestingly,
Yeah.
you think like 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and, I know you've interviewed Lee Cardos and, the other people who are academics who are doing David Bowie, and they talk about, the last one I watched, this terrible, what's her name, who did the book on Bowie and video work. And I actually,
Lisa Pratt.
Thank you, Lisa Perrott. Yeah, Miss Perrott, or Professor Perrott, was mentioning in that video, in your interview with her, how like doing video was like considered non-academic for a while, and
Yeah.
so there's kind of trends in academia where things are non-academic, and then suddenly it's okay to do them. It's like before postmodernism, you couldn't like throw in popular culture. Andy Warhol pops up and says, "Hey,
Yeah.
we can do this now," but like academics kind of took a longer time to do this. So I thought I would meet some resistance, actually, if I say,
Sorry to interrupt, but Lisa Perrott used the term Bowie studies, which sort of blew me away. She went to a conference on Bowie studies.
doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, if you look at all the books that have been published on David Bowie and all the academic books that have been published on David Bowie, and you've interviewed some of these professors that actually I feel a little bit, quite humble to be, here I am now on Majority and Bowie and Marc Lowe, and now I'm sort of following, the initial interview, I was like your second, right, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Now suddenly it's like you've interviewed all of these sort of academics and scholars who are much more, sort of well known worldwide. But anyway, yes. So what I was also going to say is, and I do this, I go on these little tangents, excuse me for this, but there's also, I think it wasn't Lady Gaga. Who is it? Gosh, I'm forgetting again. I'm so bad.
I have not interviewed Lady Gaga.
No, it's not Lady Gaga. And I know you haven't interviewed Lady Gaga. And I know she's also influenced by David Bowie, right? So that's another thing. That's another Bowie. Bowie just connects everything in the universe, which is weird, but he just tends to do that. Anyway, pop, the studying pop or rock musicians or popular culture, and I think since postmodernism, of course, but it's become more and more acceptable in academia, right? And so you're finding that, and I'm right when interviewing various people on David Bowie who are academics, but also many of them have interest in music or the arts or some other aspect as well as academics. I'm like this too. I make my own music, as you mentioned, and so on. Not only did I not meet resistance, and this is the point I'm trying to get to here, but from both universities, both of the professors I asked about, British culture, how about David Bowie? There was like this enthusiasm that surprised me. Oh, David Bowie, that sounds great. And I think the students will enjoy it, they both said, kind of thing. Now, here's the thing. For our generation, you and I, say like a class on David Bowie. Oh man, I wish I had that when I was going to college. I've heard that from how many people of
Yeah.
my age or slightly younger even. Oh, David Bowie, the kid, they're so lucky. They get to study David Bowie. But the interesting thing is, and this also goes to your question about teaching it in Japan. And I have so much to say here. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can, but many things to talk about with the class. Firstly, I'm teaching, like 18, 19, 20-year-olds, something like this. Different generation, totally different mindset. And this is something that they're teaching me.
Yeah.
Um, you think about the way that music is imbibed today, the way that not only music, but music video and music. David Bowie was always sound and vision, right? And that's
Yeah.
like Perot sensei, a sensei. Listen, I'm using Japanese. Professor Perot, excuse me,
Yes.
was talking about this, right? So, like, sound and vision, right? Talk about how important the visual aspect of David Bowie's music was and is, for example, and then the music. So, how though do 18, 19-year-olds, well, the US and Japan may be slightly different too. That's another story. How do they imbibe? You know, how do they take in their music? So when we were growing up, John, well, our age group, it's first it was vinyl or even 8-track cassette. I don't even want to go back that far. Vinyl and cassette tapes, and then CDs come. And, now we have, of course, streaming music and YouTube, but also Spotify and TikTok and
Yeah.
Twitter with X, or even, I'm not even sure if that age group's using Twitter or X. Maybe they are. They don't use Facebook. I know that for sure. The 18, 19, 20, they don't care about Facebook, but they're getting their music through social media mostly. And they're getting it in these tiny, tiny sound bites. And I know this isn't official, but before we started this official interview, you mentioned how if it gets too long, we lose your attention.
Yeah.
This is the trend worldwide because of our phones and our,
Yeah.
instant
Right.
click, 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 click culture. And that's true of music. Actually, see, I'm going off on another tangent, but here it is like, just to bring in Bowie a bit, and I'll talk about the course. I talk about this in the class, so this does
So
connect.
can I ask you to hold that thought? And let me just ask you this question.
Many
So,
thoughts. So you can
yeah,
ask me to
yeah.
hold many thoughts. Yeah.
You mentioned that your students are 18, 19 years old. I'm assuming that they're Japanese. Um,
Yes, most of them are.
do,
Yeah,
do most of them come to the class with very limited knowledge of who David Bowie is?
not limited. Most of them have zero knowledge.
What then
There's
attracts
one
them
thing
to
I
the class?
wanted to say. Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, what draws them to the class?
Credits.
Credits. Okay. So
Wait,
here,
wait.
well,
I'm
all right.
happy.
One other related question,
I'm joking. Partly
um,
true.
so are most of these students, to them,
Yeah.
Ziggy Stardust exists at the same time as Black Star. They're coming to Let's Dance at the same time they're coming to The Man Who Sold the World. It all exists at the same time for them.
Not really, because the
Okay.
way that and this goes to how do I structure my course,
Yes. Okay. Okay.
in part by necessity.
Yeah.
If someone of our generation, if I were teaching this class, and actually I might do a little promotional thing here because I would like to teach this online and open it up in English,
Yeah.
national community. We have the time lag thing. I have to figure that part out. But, and do like via Zoom or via Skype or whatever. If I were to teach this class to someone who already knows David Bowie's work, who grew up with David Bowie, or even a more casual fan who just has heard, let's say, Let's Dance, Black Star, and Ziggy Stardust. Let's take those three seminal albums and has some vague idea, concept of who he was, when he lived, and what kind of, at least some things that he produced, that they've heard the best of David Bowie, whatever it is, or they've seen the China Girl video, whatever it is. I would teach it differently. Absolutely. Then I did teach this course. This is an introduction to who was David Bowie. Who was this man? What did he do? And why should we care? Why should we study him? And it's not just about the music.
Yeah.
And of course, you would think, like, how do you structure an academic or semi-academic? I mean, it's academic, it's at a university, they're getting credit. They have to write papers. They have to, come to class and listen to me blab. And also, it's a multimedia. It's definitely a sound and vision course. I don't just chat the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
That would be boring. It's pointless. Or they sitting reading somebody's text about Bowie. Actually, I taught it 3 years, right? The first year I taught it, the experiment, first time around. The thing that was different was I was using a book that actually went out of print, which focused on Bowie and individuality and how he was, like don't follow the don't be a sheep, don't follow the crowd, and be
Right.
an individual. And that's kind of like the theme of this study.
Yeah.
And each chapter is very short, and I thought that would be a good way in. It's in English. It went out of print. The second year I taught the class, I ordered the same thing, same syllabus. Obviously, I would make small adjustments, change things, having learned the first time around. The bookstore contacts me, says it's out of print. We can't get it. And that was like 2 weeks before the class is going to start. Ordering books from the US or the UK in English in Japan, it takes like sometimes 2 or 3 months to get them for the bookstore because,
Yeah.
if so, obviously I couldn't use it the second year or the third year. So I actually scrapped the whole, no textbook the second time around. I kept adjusting, it's kind of experimental, right? You adjust as you go. So the second year I taught it was different than the first year, and the third year was slightly different. I can talk about that a little bit, but so the first year we had this textbook, at least we had a chapter, and like in one chapter, for example, they'll talk about Nietzsche and the Übermensch, the Superman, and so I'll introduce the Superman, the song and the lyrics, and talk about how that concept plays in that, and then talk about other, for instance, songs or places where we get that concept or how it connects to that period. But basically, let me go back a step or two to make it more general answer to this and how I structure the course for 18, 19, 20-year-olds coming into the class with no knowledge or very, very little knowledge. Maybe they saw one video somewhere or their mom likes Bowie. The first year I had one or two kids come up to me and go, my mom, who's like my age, right, would be my age,
Yeah.
my generation, my mom, or a little bit younger than me, actually, probably, in most cases, because these, right? My mom is a Bowie fan. She loves Let's Dance, and she was so excited when I told her I was taking a course at university, So I got that kind of thing occasionally. But how do I structure the course? It is basically chronological. So for a 13-week course, the first day of class, my introduction class would be almost all showing video and little interview clips. And who was this guy? And just showing it's not TikTok, it's not 15 seconds, but I try to give like a panorama of different styles and cha 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 changes, and cha 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 cha,
Yeah.
these like these fast with all these different images. I don't do quite that the first day, but I give them like either full videos or excerpts of things from different periods, kind of chronologically, and say like this is who just get them excited, kind of like get them hooked into the thing and want to study. From the second class, which is the first real class after the introduction, we have 12 weeks. I start with the early days. I start with pieces of the Sound and Vision documentary, which is on YouTube. I don't know if you've seen. Very basic. I'll show just part of that, his early days growing up in the UK in the suburbs, and how he was into jazz and this and that, and how he got interested in music, and and then Hermione and his relationship in the early days with all that stuff, and then Space Oddity, the first, and then I'll
Yeah.
go and I'll talk about that period, and I'll talk about the politics behind and the meaning of the lyrics, the songs. I can't share everything. I have 90 minutes to do one bit. So
Right.
basically, the 70s get the most attention in terms of album by album, year by year.
Yeah.
So I'll do like 1969 Space Oddities, slightly moving in like the trailing off at the tail of the class will be an introduction to 1970 and the man who sold the world. Then the next class will focus on the man who sold the world, for example, Nietzsche and the Übermensch. And I'll show a thing on what was that, like an introduction to Nietzsche's philosophy and how it influenced Bowie in his song and whatever. The lyrics, play the song, show some visual, maybe, the cover art with him wearing the dress, and talk about that and the sexuality, and then Angela Barnett and Angela Bowie, etc., and go on. Then the next week, right, we'll move into Hunky Dory, and then Ziggy Stardust, of course, takes, we certainly, I try to take time for that and how important that was. I show bits of different documentaries. I show part of the, I showed, actually, I think I showed the full Cracked Actor documentary,
Yeah.
maybe parts between classes, between Diamond Dogs and Young Americans, or between Aladdin Sane / Pinups and Diamond Dogs, something like that.
Do students find any of that to be shocking, controversial? Do they understand that it was controversial?
I
Yeah.
think they do. They're made to understand, but I don't think it's shocking at all. And
Yeah.
one reason is, and this may be one difference between the US and Japan, although I'm not sure how shocking it would be to 18, 19, 20-year-olds in the US who have seen and everything. And now with the internet, basically, I don't even want to get into this, but like the dark internet and who knows what the heck is out there. I don't even want to
Right.
know. I've seen everything, and so I don't know if it's shocking to anyone today, but the historically or culturally, the importance of that and how shocking it was, like when he's sitting there and saying, oh, people are calling us sissies because we wear our hair long before
Yeah.
he's David Bowie, even, and I show them clips like that early on. I think that, they get the cultural they get the background of that, and I think they can understand. Are the students themselves shocked? I don't think so.
Right.
But the other thing, talking about Japan versus the US, not to make it black and white, but coming from the US and teaching in Japan, living here so many years. I also speak Japanese fluently, by the way, for the viewers. And so, I've been sort of heavy into, this culture. I've been living here for a long time and studying the language and all that kind of stuff and teaching Japanese literature. And so on. You know, part of the course, actually, this is answering kind of a little bit going off topic, but coming back, is connecting Bowie in Japan too, and his, the influence wearing the kimono, Ziggy
Right.
Stardust, Yamamoto Kansai, we say Kansai Yamamoto, and the cover of Heroes was taken by a Japanese photographer. He's still living, by the way, just had his
Oh,
80th birthday. I'm
I did
actually
not.
connected to a woman who's connected to him, works for his place in Meguro in Tokyo. He's the guy who took the photo and took those photos of Bowie walking around Kyoto. They used to go traipse around together, and he'd take photos of Bowie at the different shops and stuff. Anyway, Skita, Masayoshi Skita, he's still living. He took Iggy Pop, he took Sakamoto Ryuichi. I'm also a fan of Sakamoto's piano, and he also died last year
Yeah.
of cancer. Anyway, you see how I go off on 20 tangents
Yeah.
at once.
So in a future conversation, we could talk about Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, but not today. Not today, Mark.
Let me get back. Let me get back and finish the
Yeah.
answer and
Yeah.
try to. So, um, one of the aspects I want to mention of Bowie in Japan and the students and why they're not shocked. I never forget the main point, even though I go off.
Yeah.
So, Bowie has been very, very influential on a movement, which also now is like old for my students, but my generation was like hip and wild and shocking for
Yeah.
in Japan. Called in Japanese, bijuaru kei. Bijuaru is visual in English, visuaru. Kei is type. So visual kei, what they call visual kei, visuaru kei, is like performers who wear men who wear makeup, who have like green or red or blonde hair or whatever, and dress in sequins or whatever. Basically, it's like a modernized glam rock, and it's kind of like hard rock and screaming or singing, with electric guitars and solos. And it's kind of like very, very much Ziggy Stardust glam rock influence. We know the influence of that on other artists throughout the world. We're not going to go into all that, right? Mark Bolan and Bowie and Bolan and all this other stuff, and T-Rex and blah blah blah. But then Japan also has taken influence, and Bowie during when he was doing Ziggy Stardust with the Spiders, they came to Japan. Actually, one of the famous photos I think was also taken by Mr. Skita, which I've just mentioned him. He took the cover of Heroes, the famous this one. He also
Yeah.
took this famous photo in Tokyo. I think it was where was it? Not Tokyo Dome. It might have been Budokan. I'm forgetting. I have to check my reference, but of Bowie, like he's kind of, I think he's topless or like, sort of half, how he dressed sort of in those things. He's got the spiky red hair and he's reaching out and the fans are all coming, like it's like a wave of fans, and he's reaching out and the fans are reaching in, and you can see Mick Ronson there, with his
I know
guitars.
the photo. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Japan, and that's Kita. That was 1972, 73. I think it's 72. I think it was Ziggy Stardust tour. And that, that whole wave influenced had a big ripple effect in Japan, not just in the UK, not just in America. Well, America, of course, Aladdin Sane, right? That was Ziggy Goes to America. But even Ziggy Stardust, that whole thing created a whole movement in Japan of visual kei. And that when I was here, originally came to Japan in the 90s as a study abroad student, the year that Outside came out, that's also eventually going to
We're
segue
gonna
to
get
maybe
that.
we're going to get there, right? So you see, I'm already like jumping the gun, uh, but I'm getting ahead of myself. There's a name for that. Right? So always getting ahead of myself. So the students, visual eduque is already old school for 18, 19, 20-year-olds today using TikTok and whatever the heck they're using, getting their music. So they're not going to be shocked by Bowie in a dress. They're not going to be shocked by Bowie wearing makeup. They're not going to be shocked by any of that. Because that's like for Japanese students now, that's even like, oh, that's 20 years ago, man. That's the 90s, or the 80s or 90s. So that's not going to be shocking at all. And in Japan, actually, it's in terms of well, I don't want to get into this too much, but like you do, and I live in Tokyo, right? So Tokyo is the epicenter of this kind of, you see, if you go to Shibuya, the Shibuya crossing is the image of Tokyo everyone has, where the 2 million people crossing from all directions at the same time, and the big looks like a skyscraper, like a Blade Runner, Japan.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
I'm not that far. I mean, I stay away from that area. It's too many people. But so you see people today, even, with crazy color hair and, high, the what do you call platform shoes
Platform.
that were
Yeah,
worn
sure.
in 72. You could see
Yeah.
kids wearing those today, but it's not even unique or this or that. It's just their style choice. And it's open, and like men wearing makeup or dresses, or now you see people wearing masks as fashion, black masks, but then they paint and they do. So it's not a shock.
Yeah. So let me ask you one last question about your students, and I'm going to transition as you sort of hinted at to one out.
Right.
But
We could talk about this, but
yeah,
yeah.
I know. I mean, there's so much I want to ask you about just about the class and the students. But let me ask you this: so you do this survey, you do it in chronological order. It's multimedia. They're seeing videos, they're listening to the music, they're reading, they're seeing documentaries. At the end of it, do you get a sense that they tend to prefer a particular era, a particular album, even a particular song, and if so, where do they gravitate?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I tend to, for those classes I had, actually, they were big, fairly large classes. I had
Yeah.
two sections at the one university, and I had one section at the other. When I did once last year, the additional class. And so of, say, 100 students, maybe even more than that, it's maybe 60 per class, something. Um, do they, yeah, right. So I kind of get where you're going. Like, do they like
Well,
Ziggy Stardust? Do they like
yeah.
Let's kind of
Let me
like
refine the question a little bit. So, one of the things that I've wondered
yeah.
is if David Bowie came out with, say, I mean, we're about to talk about One Outside. Let's say he came out with that as his very first album. Would it be embraced? Would it be ignored? Or Black Star or Heathen. A lot of folks that are our age, I'm 55. I think you're a little bit younger than me,
Yeah.
and a lot of people that are older, they became familiar with Bowie from his period in the 70s and maybe the early 80s.
Yeah.
And you often encounter an attitude where those were his best years. So for an audience who's been introduced to Bowie for the very first time, do they make that type of distinction? Or do you have some students who are really just in love with Earthling? Or do they recognize, the next day as a profound work? Or do they also say, hey, Ziggy Stardust is just the best?
You know what? Many of the students, I mean, it depends. Some like
Yeah,
Life on Mars, like some of the
yeah.
things you would expect. You know what they like? Under pressure. Dun, 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 dun. Why?
Yeah.
That movie that hit big in Japan. I actually went to the movies to see that when it was here. It was pre-COVID. I was still living in Fukuoka, right?
Which
About Freddie,
movie?
about Freddie
Oh, about
Mercury.
Freddie Mercury. Yes. Okay.
Remember the
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
It's not not like Moonage Daydream, the documentary on Bowie, but or if that's a documentary, we could talk about that too.
Yeah.
I love that. The Brett Morgan. But
Bohemian Rhapsody.
like they like Queen. So
Yeah.
then like, oh, he was playing with Queen. And I also make it a point to share those things.
Yeah.
This is partly talking about my class, like about some of the collaborations he did. I never have time to do everything, John. Just like we're not gonna have
Yeah.
time to talk
Yeah.
about everything.
Yeah.
I want to show them, like the Placebo David Bowie collaboration from
Yeah,
1999, I think, Without You, I'm nothing, I'm nothing. I mean, that's how I learned of Placebo, and later I became a Placebo fan and saw them live. For
yeah.
example, all these collaborations, I don't know if you know this one, Kashmir. I think they're Danish band, but we did a collaboration with this band called Kashmir, and they did
Right,
a
right.
it's great, and like then I became a fan of Kashmir. Like
Yeah,
Bowie, actually, I became a fan of Nine Inch Nails, and this is going to also seg into outside,
yeah.
uh, seg. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Shh, rewind the tape. So, you know, what was I saying there? Yes, Nine Inch Nails and David Bowie did the tour in
Yeah.
1995. Outside came out 1995. Nine Inch Nails, sorry, I am jumping ahead now a little bit to talk about the outside period, but just in terms of collaborations, right? So he collaborated with Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails. I had known who Nine Inch Nails were, and I had some interest, but then I was like, whoa. And then I discovered the Downward Spiral, which had come out the year before and was a huge thing in the US. That was my first year in Japan. I'll talk about that when you ask me about
Okay.
outside.